Hey folks, it's Don. On this episode of The Naturalist, I'm back to Gallagher Fen to see what this looks like in July. So let's go. Gallagher Fen is a state nature preserve, and the highlight, of course, is the fen itself. But alongside the fen is some prairie savanna and some woods that you walk through to get to the sites. So this area is a product of the glacial history of Ohio, this part of Ohio, and which I've talked about before and I'll mention again today. But there's lots of cool stuff here. Birds, insects, plants, of course. I've noticed lately that Queen of the Prairie is blooming around the area. So I hope that we'll see some of that down there. We'll see some of the bur oaks and white oaks in the prairie savanna, and some of the sunflowers, the asters and things will be blooming at this point. So here's the trail system at Gallagher Fen. We're out here, the parking area along Old Columbus Road. I'm in Clark County, just east of Springfield, Ohio. And we're going to take about a half-mile walk through woodland, secondary forest, to get to two loops that take you through the fen, parts of the fen, and some of the woodlands in the prairie savanna. So I don't know how much I'll film, just the walk in, other than some highlights. But I'll spend most of my time with you in the fen area. So let's go to Gallagher Fen. One thing you're met with as you take the walk just into Gallagher Fen through the secondary woodland is a lot of hickory. A lot of hickory and oaks, a lot of nut trees, walnuts. And among the hickories there are several species, including shagbark hickories, pignut hickories, bitternut hickories, maybe mockernut, and even shellbark is possible here. But one other thing I'm noticing is they're shedding a lot of their nuts early. This is kind of odd, but this trail is littered with hickory nuts. All right, to me these look like pig nuts, or what's known as a variety or variation of pig nut called red hickory. And they're just littering this trail. I don't know what's going on here exactly. This is a little earlier than they should be dropping normally. But they're just everywhere, and you know, things are trying to take advantage of that. Squirrels and maybe some birds can get in those things. But that's just an interesting thing. You're going to see a lot of hickories, a lot of big ones for that matter, and a lot of them are dropping their bounty right now. So here's just an example of a shagbark. All right, pretty big one. Very large leaves, compound leaves. All right, so let's keep going and see if we see that happening routinely, or if that was just a one-off of that particular tree. In front of me here is a nice woodland wildflower that's just beginning to bloom. This is tall bellflower, known for its star-shaped flowers. They bloom from the bottom up on a spike, and they can get quite tall. So this one's about almost 7 feet tall in front of me. And I've noticed them blooming just starting to bloom all along the trail on the way into the fen. This is Campanulastrum americanum. The genus used to be Campanula, so that was changed recently. But there you go. And those will bloom over the next week or two, or even longer, as the season goes along. Onward. I emerged from the walk in from the trail over in that direction, and in this spot there's an old pioneer cemetery that still has some old tombstones in some disrepair. I think these stones go back to the early 1800s, if not earlier. So let me see what some of these say. Actually quite hard to read. That one has no, yeah, 1816 on this one. So I won't go around to all of them, but tombstones of that era, as you can see, they've been knocked around quite a bit. But what I was going to show you here is, as I walked in, it was a nice forest with lots of hickories and oaks. but it had a pretty big understory of honeysuckle. And out in this area, we're getting closer to the fen proper. This has been now managed for honeysuckle and other invasives. So this understory has been cleared, where the honeysuckle's been removed and other invasives. I can see older areas where they've done that, and in the background there I can see honeysuckle shrubs that have been killed more recently, probably with herbicide or cutting and herbicide. And I believe they do run some managed fires through here as well, controlled burns in the prairie savanna here to maintain the understory like a true prairie savanna. So this area has had some of that type of management, and you can see there's just no honeysuckle here in front of me. So what we're going to do is take a little loop that takes us down into the fen. We'll look at some of the prairie savanna and then the fen proper, circle around and come back out the other end. So let's go. One thing before I leave this cemetery site I wanted to show you is these bur oaks that grow here. So there's a number of these bur oaks growing around here like you see in front of me. And I just want to let you know how big the leaves of these things can get. So that's a bur oak leaf at the bottom of the canopy down here where it's a little more shady. But that leaf is at least a foot long, maybe even longer. 14 inches maybe. And there's a lot of them, big leaves like that. Not very lobed, as you can see down here near the bottom of the canopy. But as you go up, the leaves tend to get smaller, and they also get more divided where it's sunnier. We're not in a particularly shady area right here, but the tree self-shades, right? The lower branches get shaded by the upper branches, and so they make larger and sometimes thinner and less lobed leaves than they do near the top of a tree where there's plenty of light to go around. So here with this bur oak leaf, you can't really see that very standard look of a bur oak where the outer half of it is kind of not very deeply lobed, but the lower half of it is often very deeply lobed. You don't really see that here. But as I look up into the canopy, I can see that more and more. Here's some down here. You can see that look with a little bit better. Okay, where the lower half is more lobed. But there's several of these growing around here, and there's a lot of big ones here too. So we'll see them, see plenty more of those as we go. So I've come from that direction, and I'm about to descend down into the fen proper, which is in front of us, down these wooden stairs. But this is a good view to take a look at the transition between the prairie savanna and the fen itself. So this is basically the end of a glacial feature where a lot of glacial till would have been dumped. It's a very well draining, rocky soil. Things like in front of us are bur oaks, these large, really furrowed looking barks here you see in front of us. Trees with that kind of bark, that is, are bur oaks. But there also are white oaks out there, hackberries, some walnuts. But underneath those trees, they're fairly widely spaced, and underneath those trees is herbaceous vegetation. As I passed earlier, I saw, again, more tall bellflowers. I see joe pye weeds, wing stem, Virginia wild rye, a variety of, native sort of woodland and prairie transition herbaceous plants that should be here. And so now this area has been managed, again, to look like this, to stay like this, because normally all this stuff you see on my left here, honeysuckle, would be invading there. And you have to either cut that out and kill it or burn it. And so I think a combination of those things have been done here, and I've seen for sure where they'd cut honeysuckle and herbicided it to get rid of it. All right, so this is just kind of a good overview of where we are. And then once we get down into the fen, that's where the water seeps out of these sort of this glacial till and collects, and it's very wet. And there's a little stream that begins right there in the middle of the fen, essentially, and will eventually flow. I don't know, it's a tributary probably to Buck Creek out here, perhaps. I'm not sure where it ends up. So let's take a walk down the stairs, and I'll meet you down at the fen. So it's been blazing hot lately. Temperatures in the mid to high 90s with, heat indices of well over 100 degrees. Today is a little cooler. It's, I think, only supposed to hit around 90, but it's still very humid. And we also gotten some rain lately to add to that humidity. But today's a pretty nice day, a little nicer at least. So I'm now down at the fen itself. So let me turn the camera around and just see what I'm seeing here in early July 2026. So in front of us we have jewelweeds, a whole sea of jewelweed. This happens to be spotted jewelweed, Impatiens compensis, and these don't appear to really be flowering yet. Okay, there'll be a flame and flower soon, but not yet. There's a couple out there I see that are flowering. The one thing I am seeing is one of its nemesis picking up. So this orange viney stuff you see here that's a parasitic plant. That's called dodder vine, D-O-D-D-E-R. It's very orangish, but it's not green, is one interesting thing. And it's a parasitic plant. It basically is a vine. It germinates. It's a flowering plant. It germinates, and it finds its host. After germinating and growing a little bit, it has to seek out a host and grab onto it and start to climb on it. And it inserts these infection pegs, essentially called haustoria, into the vascular system of their host. It is very common on impatiens, I've noticed, in wetlands, in fens, very common. And it could be because impatiens has a very soft stem, very easy for that vine to penetrate it, and it basically just takes in vascular fluids with sugars and amino acids and things from their host. And they do not photosynthesize. They have no chlorophyll. They rely entirely on their host to survive. So they're an obligate parasitic plant. There are some parasites that are facultative. And again, very common on impatiens, and that could be because impatiens is such a soft-stemmed plant, although they will attack a variety of other things as well. So very common thing to see is dodder vine infesting impatiens. Okay, as I talk about this, in the distance I see a hummingbird visiting some of the open impatiens flowers, so that's something that's very common as well. When these things flower, hummingbirds love them. Okay, they have the typical tubular flowers that hummingbirds like to probe, and they're a big source of nectar for hummingbirds. All right, so let's keep going. Here's a little bridge across, and you can see this is where the stream is coalesced out of the springs from the hillside over there. As I walked out here, there were frogs that jumped in it. I see damselflies of several species dancing along this whole area. And out in the distance, I see one of my quarry, Queen of the Prairie. Now, I hope to get a lot closer to that, but that's a beautiful pink flowering wetland plant that we'll get close to here shortly, I hope. And also greeted or situated by this little run is a big glacial erratic, a big chunk of granite that was put there by the glaciers. Came from somewhere up in Canada 15,000 years ago, and here it is. It's a lot of neat stuff to see everywhere you look. Here's a plant called boneset. All right, has these interesting perfoliate leaves, so the stem actually appears to penetrate the leaves, go right through the leaves. So that's boneset, very common wetland plant. Joe Pye weeds, not ready to bloom yet. And here's a beautiful damselfly in front of us. They're tough to get on camera because they flit around a lot. I hope you can see that. All right. Lots of cool stuff. This fen, like Cedar Bog, which is not very far away, are just super hyper diverse areas, and just a treat any time of the year. This place is probably at its peak in late July in terms of flowers. So Here's a nice overview look of the fen with the watercourse down the middle, the prairie savanna in the distance there, and I can see woodland sunflowers and things blooming from here. And I see the starts of prairie dock flowering, which are the large flowered plants out in the middle there. We'll get closer to some of those somewhere. But one interesting thing about prairie dock, and this is cut-leaved prairie dock, people think of that as kind of a dry prairie plant, but here it is, this species growing right in the water, basically, right in the water course there. So very tolerant of wet feet, even though you think of them as dry prairie plants. Okay, but this is a nice overview. I also just saw a colleague of mine from Wright State taking a walk today, a second ago. All right, so there's our overview, and I can see in the distance now the trail we'll need to take out where my friend is at the moment. We're going to see some Queen of the Prairie over there, close to the trail. But there's all kinds of other highlights too to see. So let's go. People tend to think of this stuff as mostly a weed. These interesting star-shaped flowers. This is Solanum carolinense, or horse nettle. It's in the tomato-potato family. It's full of alkaloids, it's spiny. If it gets in pastures, people consider it a weed. It is a native plant, but it does have these pretty flowers. And insects love it, particularly flea beetles. When you see the leaves of a Solanum carolinense, they're almost always shot-holed like this by flea beetles, but other sphinx moths and things would eat it as well. So it's kind of intermingled here with lots of other plants here, and it's nice in this context. Okay, in nature where it's supposed to be, I guess, not in your field where you don't want it. Here's a Joe Pye weed just about ready to burst. And more to come. Here's yet another member of the mint family. This is American germander in bloom. Little sort of scoop-shaped flowers on a spike with a square stem like basically all mints. And it's sort of showing itself right now. With a red-tailed hawk screaming in the background. This is a nice little spot with a mix of wildflowers starting to bloom. There's a Rudbeckia species out there. There are Virginia mountain mints just beginning to bloom right here. And there's phlox species. I'm not sure which species exactly, but there are phlox starting to bloom. Really beautiful flowers. And ahead, we're soon going to get into our Queen of the Prairie. There's ferns mixed in here too. Really nice mixed, hyper diverse spot for Ohio. On our right, we have a mix of shrubby vegetation. There's ninebark, very common wetland shrub. This one's kind of not revealing anything special at the moment, but they make a nice flower clusters in the spring, and these are the developing seeds. Then we have alders, and we unfortunately have some buckthorn in here too, it looks like, which we don't want. It's not our native buckthorn, but mostly good. I see some cattails. Here's a cattails and irises. All right. And I'm walking my way to the Queen of the Prairie. So this looks like our better patch, maybe where I can get the closest to them. But these are the pink flowering plants you see sticking their heads up out here. Filipendula is the genus. Here's a closer view of one flowering head. Okay, very nice wetland plant. It's called Queen of the Prairie. But again, you typically see Queen of the Prairie in wetland areas, fens and things, and wet prairies. Not your typical dry or short or tall grass prairies. So that's showing its head all in this area. Really nice. Okay, let's keep going. Right back here is where this little stream literally emerges right out of the hillside and leads to this little stream. There's an area out here that's always intrigued me. It's very barren. There's only a few plants out there. It's very calcareous and gravelly. I think it's just so wet and so nutrient poor that nothing really will grow in that spot. Not very much anyhow. Speaking of plants adapted to poor soils, there are some carnivorous plants in this fen, like bladderwort, and I haven't seen that today, but I am seeing a lot of cool stuff flowering that I haven't seen before. So this is white camas or white wand lily. So that is blooming. Very delicate flowers here, light yellow, right along this little stream edge. And here's some close-ups of this cut leaf prairie dock. You can see the leaves with their lobed, almost lobed or toothed margins. And then here's a loosestrife species. This is fringed loosestrife that is flowering. Very light yellow, downward pointing flowers. Bright yellow, kind of like a buttercup kind of yellow. But all kinds of stuff. There is some buckthorn in here that I think is an invasive buckthorn. I'm not totally sure. But all kinds of cool stuff. I see some coreopsis blooming, rosin weeds, tall bellflowers, and some roses. And something out in the distance you probably won't be able to see is prairie fen plantain or Indian plantain. Out in the distance, kind of cream colored flower clusters. Maybe we'll get close to that along the trail somewhere, but you have to take my word for it, I guess. But lots of cool stuff already, but like I said, if you come back here in about 2 weeks or so, even more will be on fire here. I'm also seeing goldfinches. Again, you won't see it. There's a goldfinch out there, very bright yellow, taking a drink right now. There's a lot of this stuff. This is a native vine called moonseed. Kind of very thick, kind of almost leathery leaves at times. And it's growing all over the place here. Now this is a native vine. Doesn't really become like an invasive problem, usually. But it's quite abundant here as well. Here's the flowering head of smooth sumac. Not to be confused with staghorn sumac, which has a fuzzy texture on its stem and part of its leaves. This is very smooth, glabrous, as we'd say. Just about at its peak of flowering. It's beautiful. All right, let's go. Here's a nice little overlook to the fen behind me. And up along this edge is also home to a whole patch of purple cone flowers, and they're really starting to kick it right now. So you can see them in the distance. Here you go, close up. And there's the fen. Nice overview. Open flowers bring out the butterflies. There's a tiger swallowtail on this purple cone flower. Flitting behind it in the distance is spicebush swallowtail. There it goes. Much quicker moving, but they've been working all these purple cone flowers and some of these other woodland sunflowers and asters and things. Here's a grass I want to point out too. This is Virginia wild rye. All right. Pretty common understory grass. And we'll keep moving. Up in this direction is just more of the fen, but this part you can't access very closely. There's no trail that takes you through it down there. So again, I'm up in that prairie savanna area. And one thing you can see in the spot here is what the composition of glacial till really looks like. So it is this gravelly stuff mixed with soil you know, has a high filtration rate. And when this stuff fills river valleys, ancient river valleys, it stores a lot of water that can be held within, you know, the cracks and crevices between this kind of material. All right, so that's a lot of limestone that's been, you see it's very rounded. That's because it was carried along with the glaciers and ground and washed and stuff like that. And there'd be chunks of granite here and there from the erratics that came along with it. So that gives you an idea what this whole area is like here, and then it dumps its water into the fen and basically creates the fen from below. All right, so I'm just going to circle my way back, hit one or two more things, and sign off. I had speculated about whether controlled burns were used as a management tool here. One way to confirm that is to look for evidence of charcoal, and indeed there's plenty of charcoal around here. Usually this happens when you have a piece of down dry wood or a big log that's burns a little bit longer than you want it to, in terms of just sweeping through the understory quickly, which is what you want. But nonetheless, this can be put out and localized. But that's pretty much proof that indeed they have run fires through here as a management tool. With prairie savanna as my backdrop, that'll conclude my relatively short walk around Gallagher Fen State Nature Preserve. For those of you watching this in early July, come back in 2 or 3 weeks when this fen is going to be nearer to its flowering peak. Till next time, this is Don signing off. Bye-bye.